controversial subjects with the facts can be tense, but we are a science here to make things make sense.
So, carbon capture is a way in which technology and technological systems takes carbon dioxide out of the air, which sounds like a good thing, which sounds like a very good thing. And actually, it's like really interesting and it's cool how they do it. They can essentially like separate the CO2 from like a concentrated source, and then they compress it into like an actual liquid, which usually goes into like a pipeline, where then that's where things get different. Is like
a lot
what
of
you do with the carbon dioxide once you've concentrated it out of the air.
And I think this has been like a dream for a long time since we've known what climate change is, what is causing it, the issue of CO2 on our atmosphere and other greenhouse gases and stuff. It's like, how do we actually, is there a way that technology can play a role in, on top of having to like reduce emissions, which a lot of countries are trying to commit to? Is there a way that we can also like invent something that'll just like fix it all?
Yeah, and I think that in a lot of the future prospects of trying to keep the degree of warming below 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius, carbon capture and direct air capture of carbon dioxide is like a big part of those plans. So it's sort of like a really important thing to understand right now, because it's like, if we don't figure this out, those plans probably, it impacts the plans for the future of how we deal with the increase in carbon dioxide from burning fossil fuels.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's a bit of a double-edged sword in that, on the one hand, obviously reducing emissions is the fastest way. Like, we don't have a particularly good carbon capture, like, what would you say, like infrastructure right now. There's concepts, there's like things that are being invented, but that doesn't exist. And so it's like, we don't know when that will be fully functioning, even out of all these ideas that people are bringing forward and creating. And so it gives a false sense of hope sometimes. That's like, and I've always fallen into this in my life, like, okay, science will figure it out. We have all these issues on Earth. Science can figure it out.
It's a cool science, like, ooh, let's go.
Yeah, and even thinking of like the ozone and like how science understood what was happening and how we could change like what was being emitted, like CFCs, and how we could change that. And we've seen the ozone change. That wasn't like, you know, a thing we invented, but it was understanding the science allowed us to like effectively repair the ozone.
It was through regulation though.
Oh, of course.
You know what I mean? Like that wasn't through this specific
But it
technology.
wasn't through people reducing. So what I think the double-edged sword is like, of course we should reduce, but are humans capable of this?
Okay, so before we get into that, I'm going to explain the three types, because there is really different menacing outcomes depending on which one you're doing. So there's CCS, which is carbon capture and storage, which is tech, again, where you take CO2 out of the air, you compress it into a liquid, and then that liquid has to go somewhere. Usually they pump it like deep underground for permanent storage. So the menacing part about that is that the places where you can store it are usually empty places that have already been extracted for oil and gas / fracking companies really like that. The fracking.
There you go. Like, well, we're going to provide. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
The fracking. The fracking. That's a drag race joke, I guess.
Yeah.
But the fracking. The fracking companies want this because they now have a new industry, which is to continue to frack and then find the places where the carbon dioxide that has been pulled out of the air with nowhere to go goes. CCUS is the version where you're capturing CO2, and instead of throwing it away, you're actually using it to extract more oil, because you need carbon dioxide in the gas to essentially go underground to push the oil out. So it's like you're actually
using the, like, pushing it away to bring, but then it's also still tied into putting more in the atmosphere.
It's like, in my opinion, I'm like, let's not do that one. And there's CDR, which is like the negative emissions version. This is a version that I'm like, okay,
everyone wants this version one to exist. Yeah.
Well, no, lots of people want the other one.
Oh, sorry. I mean, like most scientists and people who are like trying to save the planet are like not being like, yeah, let's just like do the one that gets more oil out of the ground.
Well, that's the thing. The more I read, the more it's like this is one of those like scientific concepts that, depending on who you are, you need to make an opinion on. Some people think the solution is that we don't decrease our emissions and we do this along with others. Whereas I'm like, no, I am like, we need to keep fossil fuels in the ground. Okay, we'll talk about it after I get through the last one, because I'm saying like there are some scientists who would be like,
maybe it's a more effective means by which to get it done.
Yeah.
And there's money involved, but okay, yeah.
Yeah, and then CDR is the one where you essentially take the CO2 from the air and you maybe you can use it for a fuel. Like it's like you try and figure out ways that you can use it in like different essentially capacities.
Right.
Or you figure out places where you put it that have nothing to do with the oil and gas industry.
Right.
So then we'll talk about a really cool thing they're doing in Iceland, for example, where they have like essentially rock where that's so porous. Like there are places we can maybe put this CO2 completely eliminated from fracking, from oil and gas.
Right.
And not contributing to those things at all. Using it as a fuel source, for example, you can put it into cement and actually make cement like better. And I'm like, okay, that's the one I think is cool. But it's controversial. Now we can start talking about that.
That one?
That one,
just all of
no,
them?
that one is less controversial. But it's not like when people talk about carbon capture, they're not. It's very nuanced to understand there's even 3 types. Like a lot of people are using
Just picturing like, oh, you just take it out of the air.
Yeah. So for example, we were just at a YouTube event and they're like, we're there because it has to do with education. And they're like, we want to say that as YouTube, by 2040, we are going to be carbon neutral. That them saying that is based on the fact that they're going to invest in carbon capture to
offset
their emissions. It's a frustrating time where people and scientists are sitting around going, okay, we're getting really cool information and really cool science, and this tech exists. But people are now using like prototypes in their speeches about how they're going to decrease their emissions. And even places like Shell and ExxonMobil are being like, we're going to be literally carbon neutral.
Right.
And it's like, I'm personally like, we need to all be talking about this now and understand this now so that we can't allow them to say bullshit stuff for 20 years and then when it doesn't come to fruition, be like, well, whoops.
Oops, the technology wasn't there.
Yeah.
And it reminds me a lot of the discussion around even someone like Bill Gates, who's like such a proponent for fighting climate change and is trying to be carbon neutral, but then you realize he just can pay his way through it.
Yeah.
Like, when you're affluent or you're one of these big companies, you don't have to take responsibility. You get to go, oh, well, I'm going to keep flying my private jet and I'm just going to pay for other people.
That's how Bill Gates starts his book.
Yeah.
It's a really awkward start.
Okay, so you want everyone else to minimize their use, but you aren't even willing to take one step towards that. And
I'm like,
and maybe he is now.
Honestly, no, I'm like, Bill Gates, like, okay, fine. Like, yeah, Lil Nas X can't get on a plane without being attacked. Bill Gates walks on a plane. I'm sorry, like, no one cares. You put on a mask.
Right, like,
you
go
literally
on
look
a
like
regular plane.
every single white man who gets on a plane who does business from Boston to New York.
Right.
Like, it's funny because I'm like, you don't even have a vibe where I'm like, you could live normal.
Yeah.
Like,
it's not like he's getting attacked by fans.
Yeah. Like,
put on a mask.
Especially with a mask. He is someone who can.
Yeah, this is a frustrating part, and it's like tied into like billionaire philanthropy.
Side note again, sorry.
But as well, just like the capitalist structure of everyone trying to escape the responsibility, and like everyone included in us. You know what I mean? Like it's easy to say, hard to do when we're like, how do we get people to minimize their emissions? And then that goes back to the problem of, is this causing false hope? Where it's like, don't worry, we don't have to minimize. We can actually get rid of it or convert it into something else.
And it's also a really early time for these types of things where it's actually it's expensive. It's like $500 for every ton of CO2 that's sequestered at this place in Iceland, which we'll talk about, which I think is cool. That's like apparently like not like marketable to people. Like it is involving places like YouTube and these rich companies to be like, we're willing to invest in order to like appear good.
Right.
But it's like there's still so much to go before it becomes like a viable like industry that a lot of environmentalists are like solar and wind and renewable energy. If we take all the money that a lot of these companies are putting to this like thing and put it towards things we know work like that, and those industries are like 20 years ahead of this, so they're so cheap. Like the amount of energy we're now getting is cheaper than fossil fuels. People need to know that. Like, you know what I mean? So I think that people are like, if we get distracted by this, we're then gonna fall away from our investment in renewables, which is an interesting thing as a Canadian, because the tar sands is like a horrible. Canada's disgusting. We have honestly some of the worst in the world ways of getting oil. A lot of those companies are like, government invest in carbon capture. Like, we'll put it beside the tar sands. The tar sands will be clean. All this stuff. And environmentalists are like, no, renewable energy. Get rid of the tar sands. Like, these are becoming these like scapegoat narratives, and it might pull millions and millions of dollars from government funding away
And
from
distract
renewables.
from
Yeah, so it's like it's so
a
controversial.
solution that actually is probably much more viable.
Yeah.
And already has legs. Like
Yeah.
solar, wind, and obviously like hydro and stuff already exists all over the
Yeah.
world. But like there's a lot of these possible solutions that have been implemented and are only getting cheaper and more effective.
So speaking of hydro, the like Niagara Falls thing I talked about on the podcast like last week, saying I wish Niagara Falls was a national park, like kind of went viral on TikTok, and people have such intense takes.
Really?
Like, it's just so weird to like when a lot of people see a video and you start to read and people are like, but one thing I learned is it's a hydro source.
Yeah.
Which I think is cool. Like, it's like funny. People will be like, well, it's a hydro source. I'm like, I didn't say it's not. I guess I did pitch it as like, I hate Niagara Falls.
Well,
but it's funny because
more
people
like
are
I think most people agree that like having a bunch of like a casino beside it's not necessarily like that nice. And I
Yeah.
think we talked about it on the pod. It's like totally hear the accessibility angle of like having it available to anyone.
Oh,
like,
I said I want like a path and a parking lot.
yeah, but it is. I think a lot of the comments were like, even though people like it, they understand it's like you kind of like look at the falls and put everything else out of your review because it's like so tacky.
I more was just like, I forgot that's a hydro source. That's cool. That's all.
Yeah, that's true.
Continue.
It is very cool.
Go into yours.
Oh, well, to tie into yours, I was going to say that the IPCC says specifically carbon dioxide removal deployed at scale is unproven and reliance on such technology is a major risk.
Wait, okay, you gotta listen to IPCC, folks.
And so I think
That's
that is
scary.
a good way to realize like, okay, we can't, sure, we should keep like investing. And
Yeah.
or I mean like people should keep studying and scientists
Yes.
will keep looking into this. And I have two things. So the first one is that they're like, here's some hopeful thing with carbon capture. And this happened or it came out and was released this year that scientists have developed a cost-effective artificial leaf that can capture carbon dioxide at rates 100 times better than what exists already.
An artificial what?
Leaf. Like the idea of like leaves, like sucking in carbon
Oh
dioxide.
my god.
Yeah.
Whoa.
So,
Carbon capture
yeah,
as a leaf.
and that it's like cheaper than anything before, 100 times better. It says, unlike other carbon capture systems which work in labs with pure carbon dioxide from pressurized tanks, this artificial leaf actually works in the real world. It captures carbon dioxide. And then it like pushes it through the leaf, like it gets stuck onto the like quote unquote leaf, pushes it through, and then comes out as sort of like fuel or a usable
Where
material.
does it go?
I honestly don't really know. Like
Because
I'm sure you set
what
it
about
up.
trees?
Yeah, I know. I think the
They're
question
just like,
the question is like, yeah, are trees more effective
Yeah.
than this?
Like you could plant trees.
Well, that brings up something really interesting. My actual sort of study. So there's a new study in Nature Food looking at the impact of plant-based diets on carbon capture. And so basically it's like the area needed for animals to graze and then like growing the food for animals and for them to graze is huge. 80% of all agricultural land or 35% of the total habitable land in the world is from this.
Oh my god.
Right? So it's just the land used not only to house animals, but to grow all the food for them.
God damn, you just always forget this when you live in a big city.
Yeah, and this ties back also to what I said earlier in the podcast about how a lot of young people don't associate their diet as much with climate change, even though they're hyper aware of climate change being an issue caused by humans.
I mean, it's so easy not to because it's like your blueberries come in a goddamn plastic.
yeah,
thing.
well, in particular, it's talking about meat, right? So it's talking about
your meat's fed to you in a yummy McDonald's
and it's
bun.
just so cultural. It's so ingrained in our lives. So this study found if only high-income nations moved away from animal products, so like not putting the burden on low-income nations, so much less land would be needed to grow food, and that would allow them to revert to their natural state with wild plants and trees, which would actually draw carbon from the atmosphere. If this happened, the annual agricultural production emissions would reduce by 61%. Over the next, what was it, like by the end of this century, almost 100 billion tons would be taken out, which is the equivalent of 14 years worth of agricultural emissions. Does this make sense? Like,
yeah.
so
But that's just if the wealthy countries decide not to eat meat. Like that's
yeah, totally. Or it's if they convert most of their land that's being used for meat production
into
to not do that,
and to also
allow
it
most
also
of it.
sounds like into like native species, like plant life.
Yeah, like allowing plants to actually grow and take over whatever the natural state
It's
would be.
so green utopia. It's so never gonna happen. Like it's like
that's what I mean. The double-edged sword is like we can't really.
But that
hope
information's
for
valuable.
One, I think it's just to encourage people, and the scientists in this study specifically say this doesn't have to be all or nothing. We're just calculating the all. If we went all the way on this, here's how big of a difference it could make for us. But of course, it goes back to like minimizing meat consumption. Getting like the reason they didn't include like low-income countries is because not only are they already eating less meat,
but they're not contributing.
And they're relying on it for actual nutrition. In the Western world or in like high-income countries, there's so many protein sources available now that are accessible that don't have to be meat. And I think it's this like obviously
it's valuable information because like these are the types of things that do help create like floods of people decreasing their meat consumption. Just being like, oh, like I'm rich and in a rich country, like maybe I can decrease my meat, become veggie, whatever. Like and you need impetuses, and this information helps that.
And I would say like I can hear some of the criticism of this being like there's lots of people in a high income country that don't have a lot of money and it's only getting worse.
That's fair.
Who would say non-meat alternatives are actually way more expensive and it's not feasible for me to like change. And that I totally hear that. I think but
remember you talked about how like that's like there are the people who eat the most meat are the richest people.
And I think for most people this is why I truly believe it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It's like step by step. We aren't perfect vegetarians. We eat meat sometimes. Like we go out for dinners at times and have meat. At home, we're like, never cooking meat. But it is like, it's a step. And it's like doing what you can within your means and knowing that it actually can make a difference.
Or we're vegetarian, but we're on a vacation in Colombia. It's going to be so hard. We show up in Medellin. We're like, we're going to have to eat meat. And they're like, no, we have like the most gorgeous vegan place called Kai. If you want to try it.
We're like, you sure you don't only have meat?
We thought we had to. We're that.
But I think it just ties into like the idea of reducing emissions in this case. And it also allows the double whammy of nature, like kind of coming back and helping us to reduce emissions by actually capturing carbon.
So the carbon capture in this case is plants. Sorry, I know. I was like, for those just listening, he was kissing the dog, not kissing the concept of carbon capture. But I feel like the carbon capture that I picture in my head, which is this thing that you're going to hear a lot about in the coming years, is reminding me of like nuclear energy in the sense that as an environmentalist or someone interested in science, you have to figure out where you stand and you have to have an opinion, an educated opinion, because that's what I have noticed. I've heard such intense debate. I've read so many menacing things about carbon capture and so many amazing things that it's like you have to figure out how you're going to approach it. And I think it will come down to like what you were talking about with the economics of like giving up meat. Like that's impossible. This will come down to where you stand on your concept of economics, whether you believe that companies are maybe going to hold the power of the future, which some people do, or whether you think it's regulation, or whether you think actually it's just renewable energy and not this at all.
Right.
Like it's I don't know where I stand yet, but
I think that it goes back to that thing around like, do we rely on capitalism to fix the problem? And that's the part that
doesn't that just seem like
wrong?
Like doesn't it just seem like no?
Yeah, no, it is. It's like, do we solve the problem with the thing that caused the problem? And obviously, we don't actually know the answer right now. Like,
no, direct air capture and carbon capture, I think, is something I don't have a strong. I don't know
enough about it, to be honest. But even hearing that, knowing that oil companies and fracking companies are now trying to find this twist where they can pump a shit ton of money into marketing and looking good and be like, we're going to be the good ones.
We don't even know if it works yet.
Yeah. So I think it is a little scary in that sense, but it's that same issue of like, the greed of it, it's the same as the oil people who fucking knew that it was destroying the planet. It's the same as the cigarette companies that knew it was causing cancer before they could like ever say it out loud. The ones that sound good are obviously ones that are like, we're not going to use it as like to promote more oil drilling. We're not going to turn it into like fuel that's just burning more carbon into the atmosphere. Let's use the one that just sucks it out of the air.
And also,
it seems easy.
Never trust an ad from Exxon Mobil or Shell. Like whenever I hear ads from like literal like oil companies, I'm like, that is propaganda. It's always propaganda.
It's always propaganda, but it can be much more subtle and insidious than that. Those companies have so much money. they don't just have to put it in ads. They put it in people. They put it in politicians. That money supports people who then create alliances and coalitions to support those ideas and find ways to package them. That's not always in an explicit ad.
So then it's scary to me because Shell and ExxonMobil are the ones who are doing all the ads about carbon capture. Like when you hear an
they
ad
have
for carbon
the money.
capture, they're also like, ooh, this way we can keep
Yeah.
extracting oil and just saying that. Like that is such a
Clean
huge
oil,
issue.
yeah.
It's like carbon capture is nuanced and it's not quote unquote bad, but it's definitely going to easily be used in a bad way. Okay, I want to talk about some good ways though.
Okay.
Or cool
Yeah,
things.
yeah,
Well,
sure.
cool tech that's like, again, this isn't, this is prototypes. But one of them is a direct air capture train. And someone from U of T who is not responding to my emails is like one of the main chemists involved. He's like so smart. And I'm like, write me back because I'm trying to talk to you. But essentially like it also links to trains, which light rail transit is also a big necessary part of the future of a clean planet. And so when a train stops, there's so much wasted energy as heat, like that, like where smokestacks and stuff, like a lot of the like heat generated by trains, it has to go somewhere. And they're like, okay, there's ways that we can get the braking to harness electrical energy to use as the source of energy for at the front and back of every train. There would be these direct air capture devices that don't need to use energy like the one in Iceland. Again, I'll get to I'm just edging this Iceland concept.
Yeah.
Those require energy for fans, but because the train's already moving, that you don't need to actually power any fans. You're using the momentum of the train to move.
Okay.
The air goes in, the carbon gets taken out with the energy generated by the brakes.
Okay.
And then where that carbon dioxide that you've pulled out goes is still the issue. Like it would maybe go into the ground with a fracking company, hopefully not, or used for fuel something. But you can put them on trains. No one has to have it in their backyard. It's just like an addition to society.
Right,
and I was
something that
like,
already exists.
that sounds easy and cool.
Yeah.
And I know we still have to figure out where the carbon dioxide goes, but I'm almost like, just start doing that everywhere, and like we'll figure the rest out later. And then Climeworks, that's the one in Iceland. And the reason they did it there is because Iceland has this rock that is so porous and able to hold carbon dioxide that they think it could, just this specific part of Iceland, hold all the carbon dioxide produced by the world every year.
What?
Like
Forever? Or
like-
just like for
even for long periods of time. But their point is that I didn't even think there'd even be enough there for 1 year.
Right.
So that was like the
Okay.
stat that they used, which was like whatever.
It's where? What is it?
It's like called
A rock?
It's like, how they have so much volcanic rock, like
Yeah.
basaltic rock, I believe it's called, and they essentially are able to put it into all the pores. Like there's so much there's a lot of surface area, like the surface area to volume ratio is off. It's just like these literal like porous rocks, and you would just put it in it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, that's cool. And but also going back to the train thing.
Okay,
Is
so-
that like a working prototype, or it's just like a theoretical idea right now?
No, it works. They think the first trains that will have it will be early next year.
Wow.
So
Okay.
it works, but again, it's like you still have to have companies that are going to make
design
them.
and spend
Yeah.
the billions of dollars to put them,
Yeah.
switch trains out, and
And it
takes
also
long
is a
time.
part of like making trains a bigger part of society.
Mm-hmm.
Like, when's the last time you've been on a train? So it's all, at least that to me is direct air capture technology that is linked to also light rail transit. That to me, I'm just like, I like that one.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the Iceland one I like too, because of where they know where the carbon dioxide is going to go. It's not going to have anything to do with
Like
oil and
fracking
gas
and
companies.
oil, yeah.
And because Iceland's energy sources are actually so renewable, they chose to do it there. And all the power of the plant is from geothermal energy.
Like in Iceland.
Like they literally
Yeah,
put it on top
okay.
of like a volcanic hot
Right,
spring
that
or
just
whatever.
uses that
It just uses that
heat.
steam to power it all. It's completely green, and it's like, okay,
Sounds
I
good.
like that one. Yeah, you know what I mean? It's like there are these parts of carbon capture that I like, and then there's this other part of it that's also like super scary, and like everyone needs to know. Like needs to know it's not a blanket good thing.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, most things are not. I'm sure there's like some insidious stuff inside the world of even like renewable energy of like these other companies trying to have their hands in it as well.
Yeah, that's
But,
true.
Like I feel like nothing can ever be like just purely good, especially once money gets involved, right? But,
Yeah.
So it's worthwhile understanding that there's no perfect one solution. It's definitely going to be like some smorgasbord of all these different things together.
Yeah.
Because they're all like so there's such dreams that any one of them coming to full fruition feels like probably not going to happen anytime soon, and if it does, it's going to be in a long time. Why not put them all out there?
It is like, definitely you have to leave the oil in the ground. Like the version of carbon capture where you're using the carbon dioxide to pump more oil out. It's like, can we just be like, no to that one? But I guess you can't, right? Because companies can do whatever they want.
I don't understand how that works.
Like, how do you stop a company from, how do you stop? That's when you realize the government has to do it.
Yeah.
Regulate
like,
it.
It is like they're doing it just on like land in a country or offshore. It's like, it has to be enough people wanting that not to happen to elect politicians that will also stand for that and not allow that to happen. Like not take money from those companies.
So it really is, honestly, it always comes back. It is going to still be regulation. You know what I mean? Like we aren't going to sit back and wait for this to become economically viable because it probably won't. I think oil is always going to be making big money. So that's the end of our podcast where we talk about how regulation matters. Like we always do that. But it's just true.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, it's just tricky, obviously, because I obviously can see the benefits of like good regulation. I see that people are afraid of like what happens when people regulate things that you don't want. You know, like if you get like an extremely conservative government who over-regulates on things like what we would want to happen in this world. So like regulation is just a term that can mean anything really, like enforcing rules on something.
Yeah.
So obviously it's like you only want it when it's like doing good, but then
regulating the fossil fuel industry is a regulation I like on my ballot when I vote. Like that's just okay. You're right. I shouldn't just say regulation blanket. I should say regulating the fossil fuel industry.
Totally. Yeah.
Okay, that's true. That's my main takeaway. I still don't know where I'm at with carbon capture. Gonna make a video about it, trying to get to the guy from U of T. But
yeah, if you know him,
if you are him, yeah. But it's like, you know what I mean. I feel it reminds me of nuclear energy, where we all need to like learn and then decide, and people are allowed to argue, and that'll create good discourse. But in the end, it's like not.
At least it's a conversation around fixing the problem.
Yeah,
like at least at the very minimal, like fine. Like it sucks if oil companies are like spending money to get involved in this, but if we can see that it's helping a little, then like at least that's a somewhat positive.
Yeah, no, that's true. I always forget that there are some people who just ignore this issue altogether.
Yeah, and like don't want to talk about it. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks
so much. Look into it. We will make a video about it, but it is also really fascinating and cool. Also, peace.
Okay. Bye.